Welcome to Chosen by Love, where fate brings hearts together in the most unexpected ways. Subscribe and join our growing family of story lovers. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin today's journey. The most valuable employee in the building wasn't the one sitting in the corner office. She was the woman nobody bothered to notice. The 42nd floor of Cross Global headquarters overlooked nearly all of downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the pale morning sun across polished marble floors, while the soft hum of conversations mixed with the distant sound of keyboards and ringing phones. Executives moved quickly through the hallways carrying tablets, coffee cups, and million-dollar decisions. Everything inside the building seemed designed to project power. Yet sitting quietly behind a desk near the end of a long administrative row was a woman most people passed without a second glance. Evelyn Hart adjusted her glasses and continued typing. Her dark navy notebook rested beside her keyboard, already filled with neat handwriting. To anyone else it looked like ordinary meeting notes. In reality, the pages contained fragments of 8 different languages scattered across dozens of entries. Russian phrases, German corrections, French observations, Japanese vocabulary, tiny clues hidden in plain sight. Evelyn closed the notebook the moment footsteps approached. "Morning, Evelyn," a manager said while dropping a stack of documents onto her desk. "Need these copied and sent before 10. "Of course," she replied with a polite smile. The manager walked away without another word. Evelyn looked at the stack and quietly added it to the growing list of tasks that somehow always found their way to her desk. 3 years. 3 years inside one of the largest international corporations in America. 3 years of being overlooked. 3 years exactly the way she wanted it. Across the office, a group of employees gathered around a television screen mounted on the wall. News coverage flashed images of private jets, international trade agreements, and corporate acquisitions. At the center of every headline was the same man, Damien Cross, billionaire, founder, visionary. At 39, he had transformed a startup into a global empire operating in dozens of countries. Employees spoke his name with equal parts admiration and intimidation. Evelyn barely glanced at the screen before returning to work. A few moments later, an urgent company-wide email appeared. International delegation arriving today. High-level strategic meeting. All support staff on standby. The office immediately shifted into a higher gear.
Phones rang faster.
Managers rushed between departments. Assistants scrambled to prepare conference materials. Evelyn calmly opened another document. Her expression never changed. "Did you hear?" whispered a coworker from the neighboring desk. "A Russian investment group is flying in from Moscow." Evelyn simply nodded. Apparently this deal could be worth hundreds of millions. Another nod. "You're not curious?" the coworker asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. Curiosity doesn't finish reports. The coworker laughed and walked away. But after she left, Evelyn's eyes lingered on the email a moment longer. Moscow. The word stirred memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. Academic competitions. International conferences. Long nights studying languages most people considered impossible. Achievements she had carefully locked away years ago. She reached into her desk drawer and touched the edge of an old credential card before quickly pushing it back out of sight. The elevator doors opened across the office. Conversation instantly quieted. Damien Cross stepped onto the floor surrounded by senior executives. Tall, composed, and sharply dressed, he carried himself with effortless authority. People straightened in their chairs as he passed. Some smiled nervously. Others lowered their eyes. Damien acknowledged them with brief nods while discussing numbers with his leadership team. Then something unusual happened. As he walked past Evelyn's desk, his gaze briefly stopped. Only for a second. Maybe less. But it was enough for Evelyn to notice. Damien's eyes settled on the open document in front of her. A spreadsheet filled with international vendor information. His attention shifted to a handwritten note resting beside it. A note containing a short correction written in flawless French. Evelyn quietly slid the paper beneath another folder. Damien continued walking without saying a word. Yet something about his expression suggested he had noticed more than he let on. The moment passed quickly. Phones resumed ringing. Conversations returned. The office moved forward. But high above the city, inside a company built on recognizing opportunity, the first crack had appeared in a secret Evelyn Hart had spent 3 years hiding. Neither of them knew it yet, but before this day was over, a single conversation in Russian would change everything. By lunchtime, the entire 42nd floor felt different. The arrival of the Russian delegation had transformed routine office tension into something sharper. Executives moved between conference rooms carrying presentation binders. Legal teams reviewed contracts for the third time. Assistants hurried through hallways balancing schedules that seemed to change every 10 minutes. Evelyn Hart remained exactly where she always was, quietly working behind her desk as if none of it concerned her. That was her talent. Not languages. Not memory. Not analysis. Her greatest talent was becoming invisible. 3 years earlier, she had been anything but invisible. Back then, she worked for an international consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Her supervisors praised her constantly. Whenever a foreign client appeared, Evelyn became the solution. A German contract needed review. Call Evelyn. A French delegation arrived unexpectedly. Call Evelyn. A Japanese executive wanted clarification. Call Evelyn. She handled everything. She stayed late. She solved problems nobody else could solve. Yet when promotions came, her name disappeared. When bonuses were distributed, others received credit. One senior manager had even presented her work as his own during a board meeting. Evelyn still remembered sitting in the back of that conference room, listening as someone else accepted applause for months of her effort. That day changed her. She stopped believing talent guaranteed recognition. She stopped believing hard work automatically created opportunity. Most importantly, she stopped volunteering everything she could do. When she joined Cross Global, she made herself a promise. Never become indispensable again. Never become the smartest person everyone uses but nobody values. So she simplified herself. She became the reliable assistant. The quiet employee. The woman who organized calendars and prepared reports. Nothing more. Nothing less. It worked perfectly. At least until today. Evelyn opened her navy notebook beneath her desk. Most people would have seen random notes. She saw memories. A Russian idiom written beside a meeting summary. Arabic vocabulary hidden between project deadlines. German grammar corrections disguised as accounting reminders. 8 languages carefully buried beneath ordinary office work. She traced a finger across one page before closing the notebook again. Some parts of her life felt safer hidden. Across the building, Damien Cross stood inside a glass conference room overlooking the city. He listened as department heads delivered updates on the upcoming negotiations. Numbers appeared on screens. Forecasts were discussed. Risks were analyzed. Yet his attention drifted elsewhere. Eventually he interrupted. Who corrected the translation error in the European logistics report? The room fell silent. Several executives exchanged confused glances. I am not sure, one manager answered. Find out. Was there a problem? Another executive asked. Damien leaned back slightly. There would have been if it had not been corrected. Nobody spoke. Damien remembered the handwritten note he had seen on Evelyn's desk. A simple correction. Perfect French. No hesitation. No dictionary. No software. Just instinct. Most people would not have noticed. Damien noticed everything. The meeting continued, but curiosity lingered. Meanwhile, Evelyn was preparing briefing packets when another employee approached her desk. Can you help me with something? He asked. Maybe. He handed her a document. The names on this list seem wrong. Evelyn glanced at the page. Within seconds she spotted multiple formatting mistakes involving Eastern European names. Her eyes moved automatically across the text. Years of practice. Years of habit. She reached for a pen, then stopped herself. The old version of Evelyn would have fixed everything immediately. Instead, she handed the paper back. Human resources should review it, she said politely. They have the official records. The employee nodded and left. Evelyn returned to her work, but a small feeling of unease settled inside her. Maintaining a secret became harder every year. Not because she wanted recognition, because hiding required constant effort. Every conversation demanded restraint. Every mistake she noticed had to be ignored. Every skill remained locked behind a carefully constructed wall. Outside, afternoon sunlight stretched across the Chicago skyline. Inside Cross Global, preparations continued. Nobody realized that the woman organizing schedules and printing agendas possessed the exact expertise the company would soon desperately need. And somewhere on the executive floor, Damian Cross was beginning to ask questions no one had ever asked before. The questions started the next morning. Evelyn noticed it first in the way people looked at her. Nothing obvious. Nothing direct. Just small pauses. A second glance. A moment of hesitation before walking away. Somewhere inside Cross Global, someone had started connecting dots. She arrived at her desk at 7:15 as usual, carrying a paper cup of coffee and her navy notebook tucked beneath her arm. The office was still quiet. Most employees would not arrive for another hour. That was exactly how she liked it. Silence made it easier to think. She opened her notebook and reviewed the schedule for the Russian delegation. Arrival times, conference room assignments, catering adjustments, transportation updates, ordinary details hiding among extraordinary ones. As she turned a page, a shadow appeared beside her desk. "You are here early." Evelyn looked up. Damian Cross stood there holding a tablet. For a brief moment, genuine surprise crossed her face. Billionaires did not usually visit administrative desks before sunrise. "Good morning," she said carefully. "Good morning." His tone was calm, professional, yet his eyes lingered on the notebook before returning to her face. "I have a question." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten slightly. "Of course." Damian placed the tablet on her desk. A logistics report filled the screen. "Yesterday I reviewed this document." Evelyn recognized it immediately. There was a translation correction. Her pulse quickened. Was there? The original version contained an error. He tapped the screen. The corrected version did not. Evelyn offered a polite smile. "I am glad someone caught it." Damian studied her for a second longer. "So am I." Then unexpectedly he smiled. Not the practiced smile executives use during interviews. A real one. Small. Curious. "Enjoy your morning, Miss Hart." And just like that he walked away. Evelyn exhaled slowly after he disappeared into the elevator. The encounter lasted less than a minute, yet it left her unsettled. Damian Cross was not a man who wasted time. If he asked questions, there was always a reason. By mid-morning, the building had become a controlled storm of activity. International guests were arriving. Security teams coordinated movements. Executives rehearsed presentations. Every department operated under pressure. Evelyn remained at the center of it all while somehow remaining invisible. At least until lunchtime. She was organizing conference materials when a senior marketing director rushed toward her desk. "Evelyn, quick question." "Sure." He handed her a printed brochure intended for European investors. "Something feels wrong here." Evelyn scanned the page. Within seconds she spotted it. A slogan translated into French carried a subtle meaning that completely changed the message. To most readers it would sound awkward. To native speakers it would sound embarrassing. She nearly corrected it automatically. Then she stopped. The old instinct battled the new one. "Maybe run it through localization again," she suggested. "Just to be safe." The director frowned. "You noticed something, did you not?" Evelyn simply smiled. "I think experts should review it." He left looking unconvinced. Unfortunately, someone had been watching the entire exchange. Later that afternoon, Damian sat inside his office reviewing briefing materials when his chief operating officer entered. "You were right," she said. "About what?" "The French correction." She handed him a folder. 3 separate documents over the last 6 months contained language errors. All 3 were quietly fixed before distribution. Damian looked up. "By whom?" "No official record." "Then how do we know they were corrected?" The executive hesitated. "Because every file passed through one desk before release." Damian already knew the answer before she said it. "Evelyn Hart." The room fell silent. He leaned back in his chair and stared toward the city skyline beyond the glass. Chicago stretched for miles beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere below, millions of people moved through their ordinary lives. Yet inside his company, a mystery was unfolding right in front of him. A woman hired as an assistant kept appearing at the center of problems she supposedly was not qualified to solve. Most people would have ignored it. Damien could not. Because after building a global empire, he had learned one simple truth. Exceptional talent always leaves a trail. And for the first time, Evelyn Hart was leaving one that was becoming impossible to hide. The crisis arrived at 3:17 in the afternoon. Until that moment, Cross Global had operated with the confidence of a company accustomed to winning. Then a single phone call changed everything. Evelyn was reviewing transportation schedules when she noticed executives rushing toward the main conference wing. Their expressions were different now. Less controlled. More urgent. Conversations became whispers. Doors opened and closed faster than usual. Something had gone wrong. A few minutes later, a message appeared across internal communication channels. Urgent support request. International boardroom. Level 43. Evelyn stared at the screen briefly before returning to her work. Whatever emergency had happened belonged to people far above her pay grade. Or at least that was what she told herself. Upstairs, the atmosphere inside the executive conference room had completely changed. Representatives from one of Russia's largest investment groups sat along one side of a polished walnut table. Cross Global's leadership team occupied the other. The deal under discussion represented nearly $500 million in future partnerships across Europe and Asia. Months of preparation had led to this meeting. Months of negotiations. Months of strategy. And now everything was beginning to unravel. Damien Cross stood near the presentation screen while legal teams exchanged worried glances. The contracted interpreter had arrived late and visibly unprepared. What began as small translation inconsistencies had quickly escalated into confusion. Clarifications required further clarifications. Statements lost meaning. Questions returned different answers than intended. Trust, the foundation of every international agreement, was beginning to crack. One of the Russian executives leaned back in his chair and spoke sharply. The interpreter hesitated, then delivered an English version that immediately caused concern around the room. Several members of Cross Global's leadership exchanged alarmed looks. The statement sounded less like a negotiation and more like a warning. Damien's expression remained calm, but internally he knew the meeting was slipping away. Another Russian representative responded. Again the translation felt incomplete. Nuances disappeared. Tone shifted. Meaning distorted. What should have been a productive discussion had become a maze of misunderstandings. 43 floors below, Evelyn continued organizing files until her desk phone rang. Evelyn, this is Jennifer from Executive Operations. How can I help? We need additional printed contracts upstairs immediately. I can bring them. Thank you. 10 minutes later, Evelyn stepped out of the elevator carrying a binder and entered the executive floor. The atmosphere struck her immediately. She had spent years around corporate pressure, but this felt different. The tension was almost visible. Assistants moved quickly between rooms. Attorneys whispered near hallways. Nobody smiled. She delivered the contracts and turned to leave. Then she heard a familiar language. Russian. A single sentence drifting through the partially open conference room doors. Evelyn froze. Instinctively, she understood every word. Then another sentence followed. And another. Her heartbeat quickened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The interpreter's English version did not match what had actually been said. Not even close. Evelyn remained standing in the hallway, uncertain. She should leave. She wanted to leave. For 3 years she had built her life around not getting involved. Yet as the discussion continued, she realized the misunderstanding was becoming larger with every exchange. Inside the conference room, one Russian executive finally pushed back from the table with visible frustration. Another checked his watch. Damien glanced toward his legal team before looking at the interpreter. Nobody seemed confident anymore. The deal was slipping away one sentence at a time. Evelyn tightened her grip on the contract binder. Her old promise echoed in her mind. Stay invisible. Stay safe. Stay unnoticed. But another thought rose beside it. If nobody fixes this, everything falls apart. For the first time in 3 years, Evelyn Hart found herself standing at a crossroads between the life she had carefully hidden and the truth she could no longer ignore. For several long seconds, Evelyn did nothing. The conference room remained filled with strained silence and growing frustration. Through the partially open door, she watched one of the Russian executives speak again. His tone was firm but professional. The interpreter translated the statement into English, and Evelyn immediately knew it was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Completely wrong. The original comment expressed concern about implementation timelines. The translation made it sound like a threat to end negotiations. Around the table, shoulders tightened. Advisors exchanged nervous looks. Months of work were collapsing because two sides no longer understood each other. Evelyn lowered her eyes. She could still walk away. Nobody expected anything from her. Nobody knew what she could do. She could return to her desk, finish her reports, and allow someone else to solve the problem. But deep inside, another voice refused to stay quiet. 3 years of hiding had protected her career. Yet it had also forced her to watch mistakes happen when she knew how to prevent them. Another tense exchange echoed from the room. Then she heard Damien speak. "Perhaps we should take a short break." The suggestion carried the calm tone of a leader trying to save a situation already slipping beyond his control. One of the Russian executives responded immediately. Again the interpreter stumbled. Again the meaning changed. This time Evelyn stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Actually," she said softly from the doorway, "that is not what he said." Every head turned toward her. The room became completely silent. Evelyn instantly wished she could disappear. Damien stared at her. The interpreter stared at her. 20 executives stared at her. Yet there was no taking the words back now. One of the Russian representatives looked curious. Evelyn swallowed once, then met his gaze. When she spoke again, she spoke in flawless Russian. The effect was immediate. Surprise flashed across the faces of the visiting delegation. One executive blinked. Another sat forward in his chair. A third actually smiled. Evelyn calmly repeated the statement exactly as it had been intended. The room remained frozen. Then one of the Russian executives answered her directly. Evelyn replied without hesitation. Another question followed. Then another. The conversation flowed naturally, smoothly, effortlessly. Every word precise. Every nuance preserved. For the first time all afternoon, the tension began to fade. Damien listened carefully as Evelyn translated both sides of the discussion. The misunderstanding that had threatened the entire partnership suddenly became obvious. Several Russian representatives even laughed when she explained one of the mistranslated phrases that had caused confusion. Within minutes, the atmosphere transformed. What had felt like a negotiation on the verge of failure became a productive discussion once again. Questions received accurate answers. Concerns were clarified. Trust slowly returned. Evelyn barely noticed the astonishment surrounding her. She focused only on the conversation. Years of study returned instinctively. Years she had spent pretending did not exist. After nearly 40 minutes, the meeting reached a stopping point. The lead Russian executive smiled warmly and addressed Damien through Evelyn. "You should have introduced your language specialist sooner." A few people around the table chuckled. Damien glanced toward Evelyn. "I was not aware I had one." More laughter followed. Evelyn felt her face warm slightly. For the first time in years, she was the center of attention. It was the one place she never wanted to be. As the meeting concluded, several members of the delegation personally thanked her. One executive even complimented her accent, noting that she sounded remarkably natural. Evelyn accepted the praise politely, though part of her wished the floor would open beneath her and let her escape. Eventually the room began to empty. Executives gathered documents. Advisors exchanged handshakes. The crisis had passed. Yet Evelyn knew another one had just begun. Because standing near the conference table, watching her with quiet fascination, was Damien Cross. And unlike everyone else in the room, he was not looking at the woman who had saved the meeting. He was looking at the mystery. The assistant who supposedly organized schedules had just revealed a skill few professionals ever master. As the last guests exited the room, Damien walked toward her. His expression remained calm, but his eyes held a question she could already see coming. The secret she had hidden for 3 years was no longer hidden at all. Evelyn barely made it halfway down the executive hallway before Damien's voice stopped her. Ms. Hart. She closed her eyes briefly before turning around. There was no escape now. The conference floor had mostly emptied, leaving only a few assistants gathering documents and preparing rooms for the next day. Damien approached with the calm confidence that made people listen whenever he entered a room. "Would you join me for a few minutes?" he asked. It sounded like a request. They both knew it was not. 20 minutes later, Evelyn sat across from him inside a private conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. Evening sunlight painted the glass towers outside in shades of gold and amber. A pot of untouched coffee sat between them. Damien studied a folder resting on the table. Evelyn immediately recognized it. Human Resources records. Her records. "You have worked here for 3 years, he said. "Yes. Excellent performance reviews. I try to do my job well." Damien nodded slightly. "That is an understatement." He opened the folder. What happened today was not normal. Evelyn remained silent. Most people do not accidentally speak Russian at a professional level. She looked toward the window. "I suppose not." Damien leaned back. "Would you like to tell me how an administrative assistant became fluent in Russian?" A long silence followed. Finally, Evelyn answered. "The same way anyone becomes fluent. Years of study." "Only Russian?" She hesitated. No, Damien's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not surprise. Confirmation. "How many?" Evelyn laughed softly, almost to herself. "You already know there is more than one." "I would still like the answer." She looked down at her hands. For years she had hidden this part of herself. Now the truth felt strangely exhausting to protect. 8. Damien blinked once. 8 languages. Yes. Russian. Yes. French. Yes. What else? Evelyn listed them quietly. German. Italian. Spanish. Japanese. Mandarin Chinese. Arabic. With every language she named, Damien grew more astonished. Not because he doubted her. Because he understood exactly how difficult such an achievement was. Millions of people spent years mastering a second language. Evelyn had mastered 8. "How?" he finally asked. She smiled faintly. "My grandfather was a linguistics professor. He believed every language was a different way of understanding the world." Memories surfaced as she spoke. Shelves filled with dictionaries. Weekend language competitions. University scholarships. International exchange programs. Opportunities she once embraced without fear. "You studied internationally?" Damien asked. "Several times." "You have credentials?" "Many." Damien slowly closed the folder. "Then why are you sitting outside my office organizing calendars?" The question landed harder than any previous one. Evelyn looked away. Because being exceptional is not always rewarded. For the first time, genuine emotion entered her voice. She told him about her previous company, about solving problems while others collected promotions, about staying late while managers claimed credit, about becoming useful enough to exploit and invisible enough to ignore. Damien listened without interruption. When she finished, the room fell quiet. "So you decided to hide." "I decided to survive." Damien stared at the skyline beyond the glass. Then back at her. "Do you know what bothers me most?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "For 3 years, one of the most talented people in this company sat 20 yards from my office." He shook his head slowly. "And I had no idea." Something about the statement felt sincere. Not angry. Not critical. Almost disappointed in himself. Evelyn was not sure how to respond. For a moment neither spoke. Then Damien reached toward the navy notebook resting beside her chair. "May I?" She nodded. He opened it carefully. Page after page revealed fragments of different languages woven into ordinary notes. Hidden brilliance disguised as routine work. Damien turned another page and another. Finally he looked up. "This may be the most interesting notebook I have ever seen." For the first time that day, Evelyn laughed genuinely. The sound surprised both of them. Outside, the sun continued sinking toward the horizon. Inside the conference room, a new understanding had begun to form. Yet while Damien Cross saw extraordinary talent finally revealed, other people inside Cross Global were beginning to see something very different. A threat. By the following Monday, Evelyn discovered that attention could spread through a company faster than any official announcement. People who had barely noticed her existence for 3 years suddenly knew her name. Some smiled when she passed. Others asked questions. A few stared openly. The story of the conference room had traveled through every department inside Cross Global. The assistant who spoke flawless Russian had become the most discussed employee in the building. Evelyn hated every second of it. She arrived earlier than usual, hoping to avoid conversations, but the moment she stepped onto the floor, she sensed the change. Voices lowered when she walked by. Meetings paused. Curiosity followed her everywhere. What nobody talked about openly, however, was the resentment growing behind closed doors. On the executive floor, 2 senior leaders sat inside a private office reviewing reports. Victoria Lang, Senior Vice President of International Development, closed a folder with visible irritation. Across from her sat Gregory Pierce, a longtime executive who had spent nearly 15 years climbing the corporate ladder. Neither looked pleased. A translator saves one meeting and suddenly she is a celebrity, Gregory muttered. Victoria's expression hardened. That is not the problem. Then what is? The problem is Damien. Gregory understood immediately. Since the Russian negotiations, Damien had requested additional evaluations of international operations. He had personally asked Human Resources to gather information regarding Evelyn's academic background. He had even requested copies of several projects she had quietly contributed to over the years. Victoria recognized the signs. Damien's attention was shifting. And in a corporation, attention often became opportunity. You think she is becoming important, Gregory said. I think she already has. Victoria stood and walked toward the window. Do you know how many people have spent years earning influence in this company? Gregory nodded. Now imagine how they feel watching an assistant leapfrog everyone overnight. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat at her desk trying to pretend nothing had changed. Her inbox contained dozens of new messages. Requests for help, invitations to meetings, questions about language certifications. Most remained unanswered. She wanted normal. The company seemed determined to give her the opposite. Around noon, a rumor began circulating. By 2 o'clock, it had spread through 3 departments. By 4, nearly everyone had heard some version of it. According to the rumor, Evelyn had exaggerated her credentials. According to another version, she had never actually completed the international programs listed on her resume. A third claimed she had fabricated language certifications years ago and somehow avoided scrutiny. Evelyn first learned about the gossip when a colleague approached her quietly near the break room. You should know people are talking. About what? About your qualifications. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. She had experienced this before. Different company, different faces. Same pattern. The moment someone unexpected succeeded, questions appeared. Doubt appeared. Suspicion appeared. She returned to her desk and tried to focus on work, but the whispers continued. By the next morning, matters became worse. An anonymous complaint reached Human Resources requesting a formal review of her employment records. Another demanded verification of her academic history. A third suggested the company investigate whether she had misrepresented professional credentials. None of the accusations contained evidence. They did not need evidence. Their purpose was something else entirely. Create doubt first. Let suspicion do the rest. Late that afternoon, Evelyn sat alone staring at her navy notebook. For years she had hidden to avoid exactly this situation. Recognition came with visibility. Visibility attracted scrutiny. Scrutiny attracted people who felt threatened. She wondered if revealing the truth had been a mistake. Then her office phone rang. Miss Hart, came a familiar voice. This is Damien. Evelyn sat upright. Yes. There will be a board meeting on Friday. His tone remained calm. I would like you there. She frowned. Why? A brief silence followed. Because some people have decided to question who you are. His voice grew firmer. And I think it is time everyone learned the truth. Friday arrived with gray clouds hanging over Chicago, and a tension that seemed to settle over Cross Global itself. The executive boardroom on the top floor rarely hosted ordinary meetings. This was where acquisitions were approved, international expansions were launched, and careers were made or broken. As Evelyn stepped through the doors that morning, she immediately understood that she was the center of attention. Around the massive conference table sat senior executives, board members, legal advisors, and department leaders. Some offered polite smiles. Others barely looked at her. A few watched openly with skepticism. Evelyn took a seat near the end of the table and placed her navy notebook in front of her. The familiar object provided a small sense of comfort. Across the room, Victoria Lang and Gregory Pierce exchanged brief glances. They appeared confident. Too confident. Damien Cross entered moments later. Conversation stopped instantly. He carried a thin black folder under one arm and took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for being here," he began. His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority that had built a global company from the ground up. "Before we begin our regular agenda, there is a matter I would like to address." No one spoke. Damien opened the folder. Over the past week, anonymous concerns have been submitted regarding the qualifications and employment history of Evelyn Hart. The room remained silent. Evelyn kept her eyes forward. Ordinarily, human resources would handle such matters privately, Damien continued. However, because these accusations have spread throughout multiple departments, and because they directly impact company operations, I believe transparency is appropriate. He pressed a button on the conference table. A large screen illuminated behind him. The first document appeared. Evelyn recognized it immediately. A university transcript. Then another. Academic awards. International language certifications. Exchange program records. Research fellowships. Professional assessments. One after another filled the screen. The room grew quieter with every page. Damien continued. Bachelor's degree with honors. Graduate language studies. Certified proficiency examinations. International academic distinctions across multiple countries. He glanced around the table. Every credential has been independently verified. Victoria's expression tightened. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Damien advanced to another slide. This one displayed internal company records. Now let us discuss something more interesting. A chart appeared showing projects completed over the past 3 years. Translation corrections. International contract reviews. Compliance recommendations. Market research contributions. Risk assessments. Hundreds of small entries. Most had never been formally attributed to Evelyn. Yet evidence clearly showed her involvement. Many of these contributions prevented costly mistakes, Damien said. Others improved negotiations, protected partnerships, or enhanced operational efficiency. Several board members exchanged surprised looks. One finally spoke. "Are you saying she was responsible for all of this?" "I am saying she contributed to all of this." Damien closed the folder and stood. Then he delivered the statement that nobody in the room would forget. "For 3 years, one of the most talented people in this company sat 20 yards outside my office." Complete silence followed. "Not because she lacked ability," Damien continued. "Not because she lacked credentials. Because nobody bothered to ask what she was capable of." His gaze settled briefly on Victoria and Gregory before returning to the rest of the room. Cross Global was built by recognizing value where others failed to see it. We do not punish excellence. We do not attack competence. And we certainly do not undermine people for possessing extraordinary skills. The message was unmistakable. The board understood it. The executives understood it. Most importantly, the people responsible understood it. After a brief discussion, the anonymous complaints were formally dismissed. Internal reviews found no misconduct. No misrepresentation. No wrongdoing. The accusations collapsed under the weight of documented facts. As the meeting concluded, several board members approached Evelyn personally. Some apologized for assumptions they had made. Others congratulated her achievements. For the first time since the rumors began, the pressure on her shoulders started to lift. Yet the moment she would remember most happened as everyone prepared to leave. Damien paused beside her chair and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "You spent years hiding your value." Evelyn looked up. "Maybe." A faint smile appeared on his face. "That is over now. The months that followed changed both of their lives in ways neither had expected. Evelyn no longer sat unnoticed at the edge of the office. She became an official member of Cross Global's international strategy team, helping oversee partnerships across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Yet the promotion itself was not what surprised her most. What surprised her was how often Damien found reasons to include her in conversations that had nothing to do with business. Sometimes it was a question about a foreign market. Sometimes it was a recommendation for a book. Sometimes it was simply an invitation to join him for coffee after a long meeting. At first, Evelyn assumed it was professional courtesy. Then she began noticing the small things. Damien remembered details she mentioned only once. He asked about her grandfather's old language journals. He listened when she spoke. Truly listened. It was a rare gift, especially from someone responsible for leading thousands of employees across multiple continents. One evening, nearly a year after the Russian negotiations, Evelyn found herself standing on the rooftop terrace of Cross Global headquarters. Chicago stretched endlessly around her, thousands of lights glittering beneath the evening sky. The city felt peaceful from this height. Behind her, footsteps approached. She already knew who it was. "You are late," she said without turning around. Damien laughed softly. "I am the chief executive officer. Technically, everyone else is early." She rolled her eyes. "That is not how time works." "Perhaps not." He stepped beside her and handed her a small gift box. Evelyn looked at it suspiciously. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside was something she recognized immediately. Her navy notebook. Or rather, a carefully preserved version of it. The worn cover had been professionally restored. The pages had been protected inside a custom display case. Along the bottom was a small engraved plaque. Evelyn stared at it in disbelief. "You kept it?" "Of course." Damien looked out across the skyline. That notebook changed the direction of a $500 million partnership. Then he glanced toward her. "It also changed my life." For a moment neither spoke. The city lights flickered below. The wind moved gently across the rooftop. Evelyn smiled. "You know, there is one thing you never understood." "What is that?" "When you discovered I spoke 8 languages, everyone acted impressed." Damien nodded. "Reasonably impressed." She laughed. "Maybe." Then her expression softened. "But there was always one language I never learned." Damien looked curious. "Only one." "Only one. Which language was that?" Evelyn looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. "Trust." The answer lingered between them. For years she had hidden her abilities because she believed visibility invited disappointment. She had built walls so carefully that eventually even she forgot how high they had become. Yet somehow, over months of conversations, shared victories, difficult decisions, and quiet moments, Damien had helped dismantle them one piece at a time. His expression softened. "And have you learned it now?" Evelyn smiled. "I am still practicing." Damien reached into his jacket pocket. "Good." He removed a small velvet box. Evelyn froze. "Damien." "I know." He laughed nervously for perhaps the first time in his adult life. "I negotiate billion-dollar deals for a living and somehow this feels much harder." Evelyn's eyes filled with emotion as he opened the box. Inside rested a simple, elegant ring. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed for headlines. Just something meaningful. "You spent years hiding your voice," he said quietly. "Thank you for finally letting me hear it." The answer came before he even finished speaking. "Yes." 1 year later, family, friends, and colleagues gathered for a small private wedding overlooking Lake Michigan. There were no reporters.
No publicity campaigns.
No corporate announcements. Just 2 people who had found each other because one refused to stay silent when it mattered most. And among the gifts displayed at the reception sat a restored navy notebook beneath a glass case. Most guests saw an old journal. Damien and Evelyn saw something different. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to look beyond a job title, beyond assumptions, and beyond appearances. Because the greatest opportunities in life are often not the ones we discover. They are the ones we finally learn to see. If you enjoyed this story of hidden talent, second chances, and a love that grew through trust and respect, Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes kindness and hard work matter, and subscribe to Chosen by Love for more unforgettable billionaire romance stories. Your support helps us bring more emotional journeys, inspiring characters, and heartwarming endings to life. Thank you for being part of our Chosen by Love family.